We're starting in the middle of Daf Yud Amud Aleph, where it says Ha'omer Ushtei Alechem. The first word on the line is Misanen. It's going back to what it said in the Mishnah regarding what did they use the Machtas HaShekel for. So it mentions in the Mishnah the different things of the Karbanis Tzibur. And then one of the things that it mentions in the Mishnah is also the Omer Ushtei Alechem, the Lechem Aponim, and all the Karbanis Tzibur. And it says in the Mishnah that in a year of Shemitah, so they would have to use the tvua that grew, sfichim, that grew on their own in Shemitah, and they would hire people and pay them to be the shoimrim and to take care of this sfichim that grew from Shemitah to be brought then for the Karban Omer. So what do you see from the Mishnah? That for the Karban Omer, they have to take the sa'irim, and for the Shtei Alechem, they have to take from the chitim that came dafke from Eretz Yisrael. And therefore there's an issue with Shemitah, and they have to hire someone to guard this tvua in order to be brought for the carbon. So the Gemara brings the source from where do we see who's the one that said that the tvua brought for the Omer and Shtei Alechem, so on, has to come from Eretz Yisrael. So Taman Taninon, we learned over there, this is in Masechta Menachos, Kol Karbanis HaYachid Vat Tzibur, all Karbanis Yachid and Karbanis Tzibur, Boin Min HaAretz, could come from the grain of Eretz Yisrael, and min chutz la'aretz. It could also come from chutz la'aretz. Min ha'chadash, it could come from the new tvua, min ha'yashan, or from the older tvua. It doesn't make a difference. Chutz min ha'omer shtei alechem, shem boin ele min ha'chadash. Omer and shtei alechem have to come from the new tvua, or min ha'aretz, and it has to come also from Eretz Yisrael. Rav Chona b'shem Rabbi Yirmiyah said that Rabbi Shmuel he. So this Mishnah that we just quoted from Menachos is following the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel. The Rabbi Shmuel Omer, because Rabbi Shmuel said, Eina Omer ba min Surya, the carbon Omer cannot be brought from Tvua, from Surya, even though regarding certain halachas, Surya is considered to be like Eretz Yisrael. What's the status of Surya? We're in the middle of Daf Yud. The status of Surya, it was conquered by David HaMelech, but because David HaMelech conquered it as a Yachid, and he conquered Surya before he finished conquering the entire Eretz Yisrael, so Surya does not have the full status of Eretz Yisrael. So therefore you can't bring it from Surya, it has to be brought from Eretz Yisrael itself. Now the Gemara brings from another place where we see the same halacha that the carbon Omer has to be brought dafke from Eretz Yisrael. Taman Taninon, there's another mission that it says in Masechta Kelim, Eser Kedushas Hein. There are 10 different levels of Kedusha. And one of the things it mentions in that Mishnah is Eretz Yisrael Mekudeshes Mikol Ha'aratzos. Eretz Yisrael has more Kedusha than other countries, and the reason is, my Kedushasa, what is this unique Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael? Shemevian mimena ha'omer, that the Omer is brought only from Eretz Yisrael, and also v'bikurim. The mitzvah of bikurim is not with any produce, with any of the shivas aminim that are outside in Eretz Yisrael. It's only in Eretz Yisrael. And shtei alechem, and the shtei alechem is also only from Eretz Yisrael. Mashe'emevian kain mikol ha'aratzos. These three mitzvahs cannot be done with bringing from anything outside Eretz Yisrael. So again, Rab Chia b'shem Rabbi Yirmiyah said that Rabbi Shmuel that Mishnah in Kelim is also following Rabbi Shmuel's opinion. That Rabbi Shmuel Omar, Rabbi Shmuel said, Eina Omer ba min Surya, the carbon Omer cannot be brought from outside Eretz Yisrael, even not from Syria, which was conquered by David HaMelech. It has to be brought from Eretz Yisrael. Taman Taninon, there's yet a third place, a third Braisa, I believe this is, that's in Shvius, or maybe it's a Mishnah in Shvius. So over there it says, Rabbi Shmuel Loime, Rabbi Shmuel said, Ma chorish rishus, af kotzer rishus. What is this talking about? There's a pasuk where it says, Ba chorish u ba kotzer tishbais. It's a pasuk regarding Shabbos. You shouldn't plow on Shabbos, and you shouldn't reap on Shabbos. So the question that Mishnah discusses is, why does it point out chorish and kotzer? There are lamed tes malachis. So therefore he learns out, Rabbi Shmuel says as follows. Just like the chorish, which the Torah says you're not allowed to plow, is a charisha of a rishus. There is no charisha which is ever a mitzvah. So the charisha that's not allowed on Shabbos is a charisha which is a rishus. Av kotzer. So too when the Torah says you're not allowed to reap, it's rishus. That's only if it's something being done which is voluntary. Yatzak tzira omer. So this comes to exclude cutting the omer shehu mitzvah. In a day that it's a mitzvah, if Pesach fell out, if it came out, if the day that they had to cut the omer on Erev Pesach was on a Shabbos, so it's a mitzvah to cut the omer on that day, because it's a mitzvah, it could be done on Shabbos. So that's what Rabbi Shmuel said over there, that the mitzvah of cutting the omer pushes off Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Shmuel kedaite. Rabbi Shmuel is following his opinion. The Rabbi Shmuel, the Omar, just like Rabbi Shmuel over here says, Ein omer bam in Asuriya. We don't bring the tvua for the omer from Surya. So why not? Because it has to be dafka from Eretz Yisrael. And as we pointed out before, that's including in a Shemitah year. Shemitah year, you're going to run into a problem of you're not allowed to cut the tvua of Shemitah. So l'chayre, in such a year, you should say, bring it from Surya. Nevertheless, we say, no, we push off Shemitah, and it has to be brought from Eretz Yisrael. So kedaite, this is Rabbi Shmuel's opinion, the Omar yotza k'tzira omer shehu mitzvah. That k'tzira omer is excluded from the Isser of Shabbos, and it's a mitzvah. So just like it pushes off Shabbos in order to fulfill the mitzvah to cut the omer, so too it pushes off Shemitah, and we bring it from Eretz Yisrael, and you don't go to Surya in order to prevent of being over on the mitzvah of Shemitah. Now we come back to what it said in our Mishnah over here. Man Tana, who's the Tana of our Mishnah that said, Shoimrei Sfichis Bashviyis, you have to have the guards that are going to protect those tfuah that are growing during Shemitah to be used for the carbon omer. So who pays them? Noitlin scharan bitrumas alishka. They're getting paid from the trumas alishka, which is from the machtas hashekel. So Rabbi Shmuel, this is the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel that says that it has to be brought from within Eretz Yisrael, like we quoted before. Rabbi Shmuel is saying that you can't bring it from Surya, you have to bring it from Eretz Yisrael, and they have to get paid to protect it to be brought for the carbon omer. Rabbi Yosef, on this Rabbi Yosef said, no, our Mishnah is not necessarily Rabbi Shmuel. Divrei HaKoili. Our Mishnah can go according to all opinions. Why? Because the halacha is Loi matzu b'Surya. Even those opinions that say that you could bring for the omer from Surya, but if they didn't find in Surya, if it was a year that there was no tvua anywhere around outside Eretz Yisrael, then then you do bring it from what grew during Shemitah in Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, our Mishnah could be talking about such a year where they had no other wheat, there was no other tvua to bring from any other place, and therefore it's being brought from Eretz Yisrael. Now the Gemara asks a question. So we're discussing here Shemitah. How do you fulfill the mitzvah of bringing the carbon omer during Shemitah? So we said that you have the sfichin. Sfichin grows on its own. But what happens if you don't have any sfichin? Hahein omer. So this mitzvah of the omer. Ma'u sheyizra betchila. If you have no other choice, are you allowed to go and plant on Shemitah for the purpose of the mitzvah? So usually you're not allowed to plant on Shemitah, but if you're doing it for the purpose of the mitzvah, will you be allowed? Rab Chia Barada boy kume Rab Mona, he asks this question in front of Rab Mona, and he said as follows: this should not be allowed. Why? Because loy nimtza, would this not then be kekaimitz ala shirayim, like a carbon mincha? Usually, what do you do by a carbon mincha? A carbon mincha, you take off a kaimitz, and the kaimitz is burnt on the mizbeach, and then the shirayim, the rest, you have to eat. But over here, what are you doing? You're bringing the carbon omer. Carbon omer is a carbon mincha, and you're taking off a kaimitz of this carbon mincha, you're throwing it on the mizbeach. What are you going to do with the leftovers of this carbon omer? Are you going to be allowed to eat it? The answer is no. It was brought from Shemitah that you planted on Shemitah. So if you're going to plant on Shemitah, and then you're going to use this for the carbon omer, so you're going to throw the kaimitz on the mizbeach, then what's going to be with the leftovers? Kaimetz ala shirayim she'ein nechalim. Then the shirayim will not be allowed to be eaten. And usually a carbon mincha cannot be brought that way. Every time a carbon mincha is brought, the kaimet is thrown on the mizbeach, and the shirayim gets eaten. But if you're going to use from the shemitah that you planted, so then you can't eat the shirayim either. So therefore he's saying this should be problematic. You shouldn't be allowed to use from the tvua of shemitah for the carbon omer. So he answers him, Amalei, now I'll bring you another case where you do find such an example, that there's a kaimitz for the carbon omer that's brought on the mizbeach, and the shirayim is still not eaten. What's that example? Amalei, nase, this will be compared to another case. Kechamisha dvarim, we learned this in the Gemara Psachim. There the Gemara said there are 5 things, sheim boim betumah, that you're allowed to bring them even if you're tameh, and this is based on the concept of tumah hutra betzibur. There are 5 different karbanis tzibur that could be brought even when you're tameh, but ve'ein achalim betumah. They could be brought betumah, but you're not allowed to eat them while you're tameh. And one of the examples that was mentioned over there is this example, a carbon omer. If all the Yidden were tameh, the carbon omer is brought, and the kaimitz is brought in the mizbeach, but the shirayim of that omer is not eaten, because everyone is tameh. So just like you have over there by tumah, that is such a halacha, that you bring it without eating it, so maybe on Shemitah we could say the same thing, that you bring it from the Tvua of Shemitah even without eating it. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to something else that it said here in the Mishnah. So what did it say? During Shemitah, so you're hiring people to protect the Tvua that's growing, and you have to pay them. How are you paying them? You're paying them from the money of the Machzas HaShekel. The question though is, how exactly are you paying them for their work? They can't take the money from the Machzas HaShekel, which is Kodesh, it's holy money. You're giving it to these workers. You have to first take away the Kedusha of this money and then pay them. So how exactly are you going to pay them? Usually, how do you machalal something? How do you redeem something from Hektish? You have the item of Hektish, and you have another item, and you exchange it. You take off the Kedusha from what the Kedusha is on, and you exchange it with something else. But over here the problem is you want to pay them for their work. You don't have a particular item that you're exchanging the Kedusha from Hektish to something else. So how exactly are you paying these workers for guarding the Tvua that's going to be used for the Karban Omer? So the Gemara explains how this is done. How is this done? So first you actually will borrow money from a money changer, from a bank, whatever it is, he has money. You borrow money from them, and you pay the ones that are reaping the Tvua for the Omer, or for the ones that are guarding the Tvua for the Omer, before the Omer is going to be ready to be brought. And then, once the Omer is ready, now you have the Omer that's ready to be brought, then, maybe mois mitrumas alishka, now you bring the money from the trumas alishka, which is the machzas hashekel, umachalal and olav. And now you could deconsecrate that money, you can take the money of the machzas hashekel and be machalal it on this tvua that's already prepared for the Omer. Again, you can't be machalal that money to pay them for their work. But once you have the Omer, the Tvua for the Omer prepared, now you take the money of the Machzas HaShekel and you exchange it with this Omer. And this Omer becomes Kadosh, and this money becomes Chulin. And now you pay back the money changer. This money changer that gave you the money, that lent you the money, you're paying back. V'tovos kain. This is the right way to do it. This is how you can get these people paid before, and then you'll be machal the money and pay back the Shulchani. Rabbacha b'shem Rabbi, Rabbacha in the name of Rabbi said, no, it doesn't have to be done this way. You can pay them directly from the Machzas HaShekel for their work. Kol ma sheyitain, whatever you're going to give for these workers, hein, domav, misha, harishayna. This is what the money was given for Machzas HaShekel from the first moment. It was chatchila, the intention of the money of Machzas HaShekel to be used for this purpose. So even though usually when you're machal something from hektish, you have to have another item to be machal it on. But over here, this is the purpose of what the money of the Machzas HaShekel was given for. Part of it was also to pay these workers. And therefore you can pay them right away, it's not a problem. The Gemara brings another example where you find the same story in the same machlokes. Tana, we learned in the Braise, Af bepischei avonim, Cain. The same thing was said regarding the people that were building the walls in the Beis HaMikdash. Pischei avonim means like the gates that they were building with the stones in the Beis HaMikdash. So how do you pay them? They're being paid again from the Machzas HaShekel, or from the leftovers of Machzas HaShekel. We'll see soon. So, but Keitzad hu oisa, how exactly are you paying them with this money that's holy? So again, the Gemara says you do the same thing. First, you take money from a money changer. You pay those people that are carving out these stones from the mountains. The ones that are shaping the stones properly. Before the bricks, the stones are placed on the rows where they're being built. Once the stones are prepared and it's being placed on their rows, so now maybe mois mitrumas alishka, you bring the money of the Machzas HaShekel, or machal and aleh, and now you have the stones here, so you can be machal the money on these stones, and then you take that money and you pay back the money changer that provided the payment for these people. And v'tovas kain, this is the right way to do it, to exchange the money on the stones once they're placed on the rows. Rabbi Yosi bei Rabun b'shem Shmuel. Rabbi Yosi said the name of Bun, the name of Shmuel, that it's not necessary to do this. Kol ma sheyitain hein dameh mishah rishayna. Whatever you're paying them, it was given for this purpose in the beginning to pay these workers, so you can pay them right away from the money of the Machzas HaShekel. If you're looking at the Mefarshim on the side, you might discover that there's different pshatim here in this Gemara. The pshat that I'm saying is one particular pshat. Almost every single piece of Gemara you're reading here, there's about 3-4 different ways how to read it. But this is the smoothest pshat in the Gemara. Zok the Mishnah. here the Mishnah continues with the list of things that they used to buy machzas hashekel, and then the leftovers of machzas hashekel, and all other kinds of things that they bought from the leftovers and so on. Zok the Mishnah, the para aduma, v'soyer mishtaleach, that soyer that was sent out to the Azazel, v'loshin shel zahiris, and there was a red piece of wool that was used also to throw into the fire when you burnt the para aduma. So all these things, boim etrumas alishka, they come also from the machzas hashekel. The chiddush here is none of these three things are actual karbanis tzibur. The para aduma is not a carbon tzibur, but it's still called a carbon. It's called a carbon chatos. The soyer mishtaleach is not a carbon tzibur, but it comes together with the two seirim that come together, and then they make a geirel, and one is brought as a carbon, and one goes to the azazel. So it's brought together from the machzas hashekel. And the lashon shel zahiris, which goes together with the para aduma, it's burnt together with the para aduma, and that actually also includes there's the eitz erez, there's an ezav, all of that is bought from the machzas hashekel. Kevesh para, there was a ramp, a sort of a bridge and a ramp that was built from the Beis HaMikdash all the way out in the place where the para aduma was made. And the reason why that ramp was made is because the Kohen Gadol that went to make the para aduma went on that ramp that he shouldn't cross over any tumah. It was made in a way that even if there's any tumah that was tumah satohaim, a tuhuma that was somewhere deep under the ground, it was made in a way that it was hollow underneath, and he shouldn't become tummy at all. And he walked on this ramp. So this was a very expensive, long ramp, a bridge that they had to build. And also the kevesh soyer mishtaleach. There was also a ramp that was built for this person that took the soyer mishtaleach out to the azazel. He went down on this ramp. And v'loshin sheben karnov. And then there was also a red piece of thread that was placed around the horns of this soyer mishtaleach. And va'amasa mayim, there was the water that went through into the Azara that they used to clean out the Azara. V'chaymei seir, the city of Yerushalayim, the walls of the city that they would have to build or fix. Migdal Yisrael, the towers that there were in the city that they have to fix. V'chol tzarchei here, all other needs of the city. Ba'en misheyarei halishka. Those things did not come from the machzas hashekel, but it came from the leftovers of the machzas hashekel after they separated for the karbanis. Abishal said, Kevesh para, the ramp that was used for the para aduma, Kainim Gedailim Eisim Mishalatzma. The Kainim Gedailim would build it from their own money. As the Gemara will soon explain and bring the story about this, that the Kainim Gedailim, that they were rich on their own. The Kainim Gedailim. That was one of the things, Gadlei Mishalechav, they had to be rich. And they paid for this ramp used for the para aduma. Maisa Shiyare Lishka. So you had this Shirayim that was left there after they took the Machzas HaShekel, and they used it for various things, but then there was still Meiser. There were still other leftovers from that. What did they do with this? What did they do with this? They bought wine, oil, flour, and they would then sell it for any private people that had to bring a carbon mincha or for their carbon nesachim that they needed. They would sell it to private people. And then vaschar, the profit that they made from selling this to private people that brought their karbanis, lehektish, that would go to hektish. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. That's Rabbi Shmuel's opinion. So the hektish sort of made a little business of this extra money that they had. They would sell this to people to buy for their karbanis. Rabbi Kiva says, Ein mistakrin b'shel hektish. You can't use the leftovers money of hektish to sell to private people. You don't make business with the money of hektish. And the same thing also, af loy mishel aniyim. If you have money of tzedakah that's sitting there and it's not being used, there's no aniyim that need it right now. So you think to yourself, Nusa, let me invest with it something, let me do with it something and make money off of it. You're not allowed to use money of tzedakah that's sitting there to invest in the meantime.
Even for the sake of aniyim.
Even for the sake for aniyim. The Gemara is going to discuss this soon. We'll see. So the Gemara meiserat truma, the leftovers of the truma. In other words, there was the machzas hashekel that they separated from the main kupa, so that they used that for the karbanis tzibur. So if there was leftovers of that, what did they do with it? Rikuye zohav tzipuy lebeis kodesh hakadoshim. They would make these gold plates to plate the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the floors of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the walls of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. They would plate it gold. Rabbi Shmuel says, Meiser ha-peiros, the leftover of the peiros. The Gemara will explain what peiros over here means. There are two opinions in the Gemara, we'll see. Kayetz ha-mizbeach. This is brought when the mizbeach is empty. It's called kayetz ha-mizbeach. Rashi says, not here, but in another place, Rashi says the word kayetz and a pasuk is used in the term as a dessert. When a person eats, and at the end of the meal, you have nothing else to eat anymore, so then you eat dessert. So the same thing also, the mizbeach. You had the karbanos you brought during the day, but then at the end of the day, it was sort of empty. So then they would bring additional karbanos, and they took it from this extra monies that they had to bring dessert for the mizbeach. Meiser Truma. So Rabbi Shmuel is saying the leftovers of that Truma of the Machzas HaShekel. So he argues with the Tanakama. The Tanakama said the Meiser Truma, they made the plates for the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Rabbi Shmuel says no, L'Kli Sharis. It was used to buy the Kli Sharis for the Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi Akiva says, Meiser Truma, the leftovers of the Truma of the Machzas HaShekel, L'Kayetz HaMizbeach. That's what was used for the dessert of the Mizbeach. Meiser Nisachim, the leftovers of the Nisachim. A person brought Nisachim for his carbon, and there were leftovers of that Nisachim. What did you do with it? L'Kli Sharis, that was used to buy Kli Sharis. Rab Chananya Zgan HaKayanim said, Meiser Nisachim, the leftovers of the Nisachim was used for Kayetz HaMizbeach, for the Mizbeach when it was empty. Meiser HaTruma, the leftovers of the Truma of the Machzas HaShekel, the Kli Sharis. That was used to buy the Kli Sharis. Then the Gemara concludes, Vizeh, both Rabbi Akiva and Rab Chananya Zgan HaKayanim, Lohoyu Maidim Bepeiris. They disagreed with what Rabbi Shmuel said before, that the Meiser HaPeiris was used with the Kayetz HaMizbeach. And the Gemara is going to explain this. What is it? What's the Meiser HaPeiris? And what exactly is it that they were not maided to? We'll see in the Gemara soon. The Gemara starts with the first chelik of the Mishnah. Kevesh Para. The ramp for the Para was built, and then it said in the Mishnah that there were the Lashon Shel Zahiris, that there were these red woolen strips that they used for the Paraduma and so on. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman b'Shem Rabbi Yonasan said, Gimel l'shaynis hein. There were 3 different red strips that they used. Shal Sa'ir, the one that was used for the Sa'ir that was sent on the for the Azazel B'Sela. The weight of it had to be a Sela, which is a little bit heavier than the next one that we're going to mention here. What did they do with this? They took this, they wrapped it around the horn of the Sa'ir, but then when they came on the top of the Azazel, they would cut it in half. Half they would leave on its horn, and another half they would wrap on a rock. And if the Eibishter was Machapeh the Yidden, it turned white. So they had to have it long enough to be able to wrap it around the rock. Then the next one, Shel Mitzayre. They also had a Lashon Shel Zahiris that was used for the Mitzayre b'Shekel. That had to be half of the weight, half of the size. Shel Para, the one that's used for the Para Aduma, was the longest, the biggest, b'Shtei Slime. It had to be the weight of 2 slime. It had to be thrown into the fire. So the Mefarshim say, because it says, V'hishlech al toich sreifas apara, it had to be heavy enough that it should land deep into the fire, so therefore it had to be 2 slime. Rab Chunye de Vras Chavron said in the name of Rabbi Bar Zavde b'Shem Rab Shimon Mechalafta. Shalpara, this red strip, woolen strip that they use for the paraduma, b'shtei slam u'mechza. It had to be even heavier, 2.5 slime. Ve'is the mafkan, that there's others that say they said the same thing, but they just used a different expression. Lishna, they said it in the following expression, ba'asara zuz. It had to be 10 zuz. 4 zuz is for each slime, for each sela that is. So 10 zuz is shtei slam and mechza. It's the same thing, it's just using another expression. So the Gemara, now the Gemara is going to bring a list of things of where they got paid from. Rabbi Yehuda b'Shem Rab Shmuel said, Talmidei Chachamim. Those Talmidei Chachamim, hamalamdem es hakayanim, hilchas shchita. They had to have the teachers to teach the kayanim, the halachas of shchita in the Beis HaMikdash, and hilchas Kabbalah, the halachas of receiving the blood, hilchas zrike, how to do the zrike. So who paid them? Who paid these teachers? Noitlin scharan mitrumas halishka. They got paid from the Machzas HaShekel. It's for the purpose of the Karbanos Tzibur. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Adifa b'Shem Rab Imi said, Mevakrei mumei kachim, those people that were there to inspect the kachim, each one of the kachim had to be inspected 4 days before it was brought as a carbon. Noitlin scharan, they get paid mitrumas halishka, also from the Machzas HaShekel.
It's not an argument.
No. It's just a whole list of things here. Rab Acha, in the name of Rab Tanchum Bar Chiya b'Shem Rab Simloi said, Magiyei Sefer Torah. Those that would check over the Sefer Torah and the Azara, Sefer HaAzara, It was read in the Azara on Yom Kippur, and it was read on Hakel by the Melech. So who checked over that Sefer Torah had to get paid. Neitlin Scharan b'Trumas Alishka, he also would get paid from the Machzas HaShekel. Gidol bar Minyamim Mishem Rabasi also said, Shnei Dayanig Zelis, there were two Dayanim that were positioned in Yerushalayim, and they would judge those people that were thieves. They would give penalties for the thieves, and this also included for the different issues that came up in the Beis HaMikdash itself. The Kayanim that would cheat people. We once had in the Gemara that Kayanim, there was a concern of Kayanim being mefagal a carbon, purposely to get back at someone. So there were Dayanim that were there positioned for that purpose to make sure that everything was done right. So Neitlin Scharan Mitrumas Alishka, they also took their payment from the Trumas Alishka, from the Machzas HaShekel. Shmuel says, Noshim ha'erges b'pareiches. The women that would weave the pareiches that was positioned between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. In the first Beis HaMikdash, there was actually a wall there. But in the second Beis HaMikdash, it was built so high that they couldn't build a wall that high. And they couldn't make it thicker either, because you're not allowed to change the measurement of the thickness. So they just built two pareichesen with an amma in between. This is called an amma traxen. So this was a massive, very, very tall pareiches. So the women that would weave this pareiches, they would change it every so often. So also neitlin scharan b'trumas alishka, they would get paid from the machzas hashekel. Rab Chuna argues on this last point, and he says, no, mitrumas bedek habayis. These women that were making the pareiches, they got paid from the money of the bedek habayis. This is not a carbon. This is not anything related to an avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, just as part of the structure of the Beis HaMikdash. So they would get paid from the bedek habayis. So the Gemara explains, ma polik. What are they arguing about? Shmuel avad like a carbon. Shmuel considers the pareiches to be like a carbon, and the reason is because the part of the avodah on Yom Kippur and different times in the Beis HaMikdash was to sprinkle the blood at this pareiches. So the pareiches is almost like a mizbeach. It's served like part of the avodah. So therefore he holds it was brought from the machzas hashekel. They were paid from the machzas hashekel. Rav Huna avad la kibinyan. Rav Huna, however, says no, it's part of the structure. So therefore it's paid from the bedek habayis. Rav Chizkiah said, Tana Rab Yehuda Gudgedis. Rab Yehuda Gudgedis said in a braise, HaKetayres, V'chol Karbanis HaTzibur, the Ketayres and all other Karbanis Tzibur, Ba'im Mitrumas Alishka, are paid from the Trumas Alishka from the Machzas HaShekel. Mizbeach Hazav, V'chol Kli Sharis, the Mizbeach Hazav, which is sort of movable. It's a Mizbeach that is not positioned in one place, and all the other Kli Sharis which are moved around as well. Ba'in Mimaiser Nesachim. That comes from the leftovers of the Nesachim, as was mentioned in the Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva said that the leftovers of the Nesachim were used for the Kli Sharis. Mizbeach ha'ela, which is outside, and it was huge, and it was positioned like a building in one place. V'ha'heichel, and everything else that had to be fixed in the heichel. V'ha'azares, and everything in the azare. Ba'en mishiyarei halishka. That was used from the leftovers of the lishka, the leftovers of the machzas hashekel. Chutz la'azares, anything else that had to be fixed outside in the azara, which means in the city of Yerushalayim. Ba'en, or on harabayis. Ba'en milishkas bedek habayis. That came from the bedek habayis. Fragt the Gemara, b'vahatani, we learned in another braise, avnei hamizbeach, ha'heichal v'ha'azaros, moyelim behen, the stones of the mizbeach and the heichal and the azaros, there's me'ilah. If you have a of any of these things, you're moil. There's the issue of me'ilah, that you're not allowed to have a from hektish. Now the question is, v'chiyesh me'ilah b'shirayim? Is there any halacha of me'ilah by the leftovers of the machzas hashekel? We learned before, the leftovers of machzas hashekel, there is no halacha of me'ilah. So if they are being built from the leftovers of the machzas hashekel, why is there me'ilah in if a person has a from the heichal or the mizbeach or the azaris? So the Gemara says, Ela Rab Meir. This braisa that we just quoted has to be following the opinion of Rab Meir. The Rab Meir Amar, we had it before a few times. Rab Meir says, Mayalin b'shirayim, that there is me'ilah from the leftovers of the machzas hashekel. Amar Rab Chiya, but Rab Chiya still has a question on this. He says, wait, Kulum Amar Rab Meir Ela b'toich shnasai. Even Rab Meir that says that from the leftovers of the machzas hashekel there is me'ilah. Sorry about that. That's only within the year. That's only within the year that there's me'ilah for the machzas hashekel, but from the leftovers of the machzas hashekel. But after the year, there's no me'ilah from the leftovers of the machzas hashekel, even according to Rab Meir. V'hacha chutz l'shnasai anan kaimen. What's our question over here? Our question is, Why is there any me'ila of the leftovers of the machzas hashekel, even according to Rab Meir? You build a mizbeach, you build a azara, you build a heichel, but many, many years later, there's always a din of me'ila. Why is there a din of me'ila after the time? Even Rab Meir says, only within the year of this machzas hashekel, there's me'ila. Rav Chizkiya answers, Tana, Rab Yehuda, Gid Gidonius. So actually the Gemara does not give an answer to this. This last question, why is there me'ila on the Mizbeach, on the Heichel, on the Azaris, if it was built from the leftovers of the Machzas HaShekel? The Gemara doesn't give an answer. The Gemara starts a new thing. Rav Chizkiya, Tan Rab Yudah Gid Gidoniyais, HaShulchan, VaMenoira, VaMizbechais. These different kalim that there were in the Beis HaMikdash, the Shulchan and the Menorah and the two Mizbechais, the one that's inside, the one that's outside, and also the Pereiches that had to be there between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Ma'akvim as a karbanis. They are ma'akiv to bring the karbanis. All of these kalim have to be in their place to be able to bring the karbanis. Divrei Rab Meir. That's Rab Meir's opinion. Chacham's opinion is the only thing that will hold you back of bringing a carbon is having the kiyar in its place. The kiyar, the kalim have to wash their hands and feet. That's the only thing that's ma'akiv. The other kalim do not have to be in their place in the Beis HaMikdash to be able to bring the carbon. Okay, so this Gemara here, the Rebbe quotes in the Sikha, when I get to the famous machlokes between the Rambam and the Ramban, whether the mitzvah of building the Beis HaMikdash and the mitzvah of building the kalim are counted as one mitzvah or two mitzvahs. The Rogatchover, the Rebbe quotes the Rogatchover that says that machlokes is based on this Gemara. If you can't bring any of the karbanis without having the kalim in their place, so the kalim sort of complete the structure. It's like a house without furniture. You have to have the furniture in place in order to bring the karbanis. So therefore the kalim are counted as one mitzvah. But the Ramban that counts it as separate mitzvahs is going according to the opinion that you can bring the karbanis without having the kalim in their place. So therefore each keli is like a separate piece and therefore it's counted as a separate mitzvah. That's the pshat of the Rogatchover based on this Gemara over here. But now the Gemara brings other opinions about this. Could you bring the carbon if the kalim are not in place? Says the Gemara, V'loi kain, Amar Rabbi Elazar v'Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, which were Amoraim, said different than what it said in this Braisa. Tereyun Omrin, they both said as follows. And they argued about this, but they said different than what it said in the Braisa. One opinion was, Kol hein d'chsiv noichach, any of the kalim where the Torah uses the term noichach, ma'akiv. That has to be there in order to be makriv the carbon. So by the menorah, the Torah uses the term noichach. Tzela, regarding one of the kalim where the Torah uses the term tzela, by the shulchan, the Torah says al tzela, that's where the shulchan should be, ein ma'akiv, the shulchan is not ma'akiv. Then there's a third opinion, V'amar Rab Shmuel bar Nachman b'shem Rab Yonasan, a second opinion, the second opinion says, v'afilet tzela ma'akiv. Even when regarding the shulchan, where the Torah uses the expression of tzela, which means at the corner or at the other side, it's also ma'akiv, it has to be in its place. The menorah and the shulchan have to be in its place in order to bring the karbanis. V'amar Rab Ila b'shem Rab Shmuel bar Nachman, the third opinion, he says in the name of Rav Nachman, va'afilas sima ma'akiv. Even when the Torah just uses the term sima, which it says regarding the arayin and the mizbechais and the pereiches, va'yosem, that it was placed there, that's also ma'akiv. So these are the different opinions that the Amoraim spoke about. So the question that the Gemara is basically asking is, why are these Amoraim arguing about these different lashonos, whether it says noichach, tzela, or sima, if there's a beferish braise where Rab Meir and the Rabbanan argued about this? Rab Meir said everything has to be in its place, and Rabbanan said none of it have to be in its place. So what's going on over here? Rav Chanina says, Kan ba'avedas shebifnim, regarding any aveda that's done on the inside of the Beis HaMikdash, whether it's the ketores or anything that's done on the inside, over there's an argument of the braise, whether they all have to be in place or not. That's what Rab Meir and the Rabbanan argued about. Kan ba'avedas shebechutz. When it comes to the avodah that's done of the karbanis on the outside, so over there it's much less ma'akiv because it's done on the outside, and over there is where the Amoraim were speaking about this. Which ones of the kalim are going to be ma'akiv? So they're speaking about two different avodas: the avodas on the inside and the avodas on the outside. Now the Gemara goes to another part in the Mishnah. In Bavli, you would usually have like a two dots over here, like a new beginning. When this goes in another section of the Mishnah. It said in the Mishnah regarding the ramp that was made for the Para Aduma. So one of the things that it said in the Mishnah was Abu Shal. Abu Shal said that the Kohanim built it on their own, with their own money. So the Gemara says, Amar Rab Chanine said, Shachtzis gedoyle hoisa bebnei kainim gedolim. There was this shachtzis, which means this gaiva, that the children of the kainim gedolim had, which is that they took pride, they boasted with what they built, the ramp that they built for their para aduma. Sheyaise mishishim kikre zahav, more than 60 kikrim of zahav, which is a huge amount of gold that they spent, how you might see that they would spend on this ramp. Shahaya kifsha shal para oimid. And what happened was, even if there was a ramp that a previous Kohen Gadol had built, and it was there in place, they could have used it. V'loihaya echad me'em moitzi b'parasai b'kifsha shal chaverai. No Kohen Gadol wanted to use for his para aduma the ramp that was built for a previous Kohen Gadol. Elas saisrai, he would demolish it, ubainaisim mishalai, and he would build it on his own because they took pride in their own ramp. And the Gemara calls this a shachtzis. This was like an extra gaiva that they wanted to have their own ramp for their para aduma. But yeah. So the Gemara now actually says that this is not true, because the Gemara brings a source where we see that even a big tzaddik did this. Hey, sev Rabula kome Rabmane, Rabula asked Rabmane, but vatani, we learned in the Braisa, Shimon HaTzadik. He was a Kohen Gadol and he's called Shimon HaTzadik. Shtei pares asa. In his lifetime, he made two paradumas, and loy bekevesh shahaitzi. And he himself built his own kevesh for the first one, but then when it came to the second paraduma, he built a new ramp. So islach lameimar, you're going to say Shimon HaTzadik shachatz hoya. Shimon HaTzadik was boasted and it was a balgaiva, and therefore he built a second one. Can't say that. It was his own that he built. So why would he build a second one? My kedoin, so what is this? Al shem mailihi bepara, because this is a special maila, special level that we use of a chumra and para aduma. Silsul hi bepara. It's another expression. Silsul means also a chumra. This was a special chumra for para aduma, that each kayin would build their own ramp. He wanted to be sure that the ramp was built right, even though it was probably built right previously, but he wanted to see to it that it should be built properly, that it should be no tumah there whatsoever. So for each separate para aduma, this was a special chumra that they would build their own ramp. Tani, we learned another thing about the chumra of this ramp. Zizin, v'ksalim, hayu, yoitzin, mikan, and mikan, there were ledges and walls on both sides of the ramp. Kedei shela yetzu v'yetzitzu ha'kainim v'yetamu. So that when the kain is walking across the ramp, he shouldn't by mistake stick out his head and bend over, and then he might become tummy. The whole point of the ramp is that in that area of the ramp there's no tumah, so they would build walls that he shouldn't look on either side. Rabbi Akiva mistakrin chulu said in the Mishnah that when you had the leftovers of the leftovers of the shiyare lishka, right? So the maisar shiyare lishka, the leftovers of the lishka. What do they do with that? So Rabbi Shmuel said the hektish would sort of make a little business. They would sell to people what they needed for the oil, for the wine, for the flour. And the Rabbi Akiva said, no, we're not going to make a business out of the hektish. So now the Gemara says, when could you make a business out of the hektish, even according to Rabbi Akiva? Ela imratza, only if the person that is going to take responsibility for this, and he wants, hefset shalai, he's going to take responsibility and say, look, any loss that will be out of this investment, I will take the loss, v'aschar lahektish, and the profit will be for hektish. Mutter. Then in such a case, if you're taking that responsibility, that if there will be any loss, the loss will be on you, then you're allowed. And the Gemara brings this example also regarding the money of poor people. Kador bar zmina, like this Gabbai of Tzedakah, his name was bar zmina. Ispaket Gabbai madal di Yasmin. He had by him, he was safeguarding the money of Yisaimin. Asa v'shal Rabmane, came and asked Rabmane whether he could invest it. Meanwhile, Amalei, he told him, in boyis di hahafsade di doch. If you want that whatever loss you're taking upon yourself, that the loss of the investment will be yours, the doch and va'agra de tarveichain, and whatever profit there'll be, you'll share the profit with the Yisayimim, then shari, then it's allowed. And Abchia Barada as well, ispaket gabei madal de Yasmin, he had the money of Yisayimim that was put by him to safeguard, and va'avet kain, he would use it meanwhile as an investment, with the condition that if there's any loss, he takes the loss, and the profit will be shared with the Yisayimim. This is what it says here in the Yerushalmi, but this is brought also in the Bavli, and over there the Gemara holds differently. There the Gemara says the reason you're not allowed to invest money of stock and so on is not because there might be a loss in the investment. The reason is because you're investing the money, and let's say punkt at that time when you invested the money is needed for the poor people, and you don't have the money available. You have to have the money available there all the time. You can't just say, oh, it's sitting here, I'm going to invest it. You have to have it always ready. Maisa Peiris. So it said in the Mishnah, what do you do with the Maisa Peiris? So Rabbi Shmuel says it's Kayetz HaMizbeach. Right, so now what is this Maisa Peiris? Masnisin the Rabbi Shmuel. This Mishnah is following the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel. In other words, these peiris that we're talking about is this money that the Bezdin, that the hektish that is invested when they would sell people what they needed for the wine and oil and so on. So what do they do with that profit? That's the peiris, the profit. The Rabchia by Yosef Pasar Masnita, he explained the Mishnah, Maisa Peiris, Schar la hektish, the profit that the hektish made, what would they do with it? That's the peiris that the Mishnah is talking about, and Rabbi Shmuel said that it goes for the Kayetz HaMizbeach. Maisa Nesachim, when it said in the Mishnah, the Maisa Nesachim, what is this? So here the Gemara gives another shot of the Maisa Nesachim, even though the simple translation of Maisa Nesachim means the leftovers of the wine, but the Gemara says the taich of Maisa Nesachim, Zu Sa'ar Revius. This is Sa'ar Revius, which is a Mishnah later that says, basically the hektish would have a supplier that would give the hektish the what they need for the nesachim, what they need for the flour. So what happens if they paid him for it, and then the price went down and it became cheaper? So let's say before they could have got only 3 sa'ah, and now the price went down and they can get a 4th sa'ah. So now they have extra. So he has to pay. He has to give extra, even though they paid him in advance when the price was higher. But because the price went down now, he has to pay, he has to give for the lower price. So now the hektish is going to have extra. That's the Maisa Nesachim. Rabbi Yochanan Pasamasnita, Rabbi Yochanan has a different interpretation for our Mishnah, and he says, Maisa Peiris, what are the Maisa Peiris? Zu Sa Revius. That refers to this extra when the price went down, that they have an extra from this, from the flour that they got now. What do they do with this? That's the Maisa of Peiris. Now, what's Maisa Nesachim? What's the leftovers of the Nesachim? Lebeirutzin. It's the wine. When they would pour the wine, when they would buy the wine from the people that provided the wine, so they wouldn't give the exact amount that they needed. They would pour over. It would spill over. So then that spill over, it collected over time, and they had extra wine. What would they do with that wine? The first opinion, he didn't say anything about these leftovers of wine that spilled over. What does he say about the leftovers of wine? Rab Chizkiya says, whatever they would do with the leftovers when the price went down, the sa'ar revius, nafal leberutzin, they would do the same thing with the leftover wine. So that's in the same category. Zok the Gemara, al dai te Rab Chizkiya bar Yosef. Now the Gemara goes back to this machlokes. So we had over here a machlokes regarding Meiser Peiris. What are Meiser Peiris? One opinion was it's the leftover profit that the hektish made with the business that they made. And the other opinion was the Meiser Peiris it refers to the extra money or the extra nesachim that the hektish had when the price went down. So now the Gemara asks a question on this. Going to the end of the Mishnah. It said in the end of the Mishnah, Zeh v'zeh loy hayu maidim bepeiris, that both Rabbi Akiva and Rab Chananya Sgan HaKohanim did not agree regarding this halacha of Meiser Peiris. Now the Gemara says as follows. Al dai to the Rab Chizkiya bar Yosef, according to Rab Chizkiya bar Yosef, niche. We understand why Rabbi Akiva didn't agree to this halacha of Meiser Peiris. Why? Because ein mistakrin b'shal hektish, af loy b'shal aniyim. Because as it said in the Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva's opinion was you make no business with hektish, you make no business with the money of poor people. So lefichach zeh v'zeh Rabbi Akiva and Rab Chananya Sgan HaKohanim lo haya maidim b'peiris. They disagreed with this whole halacha of the Meiser Peiris. But I'll die to the Rabbi Yochanan. But according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, kashya. It's a question. What did Rabbi Yochanan say? He said that the Meiser Peiris refers to the extra nesachim that they had because the price went down. Why did Rabbi Akiva not agree with this? What does it mean when it says in the Mishnah, Lehoyu Maidim Bepeiris? V'hatanina, this that they had leftovers because the price went down. That's a clear Mishnah that says later, and everybody agrees to this. Omdu mi gimel. If the price went down from 3 and now you can get 4 sa'ah for the same price, Yisapik Medala, the supplier has to give more, and therefore they have leftovers. Tanina, and it says in our Mishnah, that Rabbi Akiva would not agree to this halacha of the leftovers of the peiris. Why would he not agree if it refers to this leftovers of the price that went down? And says the Gemara, he agreed that you had this leftovers. But what he disagreed with is, what was it used for? Rabbi Shmuel said it was used for the kites for the Mizbeach. Aval Maidanayu b'klisharis. And Rabbi Akiva said that this leftovers was used for the klisharis. Okay, now the Gemara comes and says regarding the leftovers that spilled over, let's just finish to the Mishnah here, the leftovers that spilled over from the wine. At kedain, so till here we were talking about birutze tzibur, what spilled over from the wine that was used for the karbanis tzibur. Now the question is, va'afile birutze yachid, even the leftovers of the karbanis yachid that a person had, v'le nimtzu kli sharis, ba'en mishal yachid, and they did not have enough kli sharis, so they would take also from the leftovers of a carbon yachid, kahada the taninan, just like what we learned in a braisa, and we had this before, isha she'asasa ksainis lebna, a woman that made a garment for the kayin, for her son, ksheira, it could be used to do the aveda with it, ubulvash shetim serena litzibur. But she has to give it over that it should belong to the tzibur. The same thing also with the leftover wine, even though the leftover wine was from a yachid, but it could be used for the kli sharis, which is going to be for a tzibur, as long as it's given over to the tzibur. Ad kedain, until there we were talking about birutze lach, the leftovers of the wine, which is a liquid. Now the question is, afile birutze yavish, do we apply the same thing of the leftovers, which is yavish, flour, for example? What would be the difference? What should be the difference between the leftovers of liquid or the leftovers of flour, for example? Very simple. When it comes to liquid, when you pour liquid into a cup and there's leftovers, whatever liquid spills over was inside the walls of the cup, and then it spilled over. When you have leftovers of yavesh, so it heaps over. So that heap over the walls of the cup was never inside. So it never got the same kedusha as it was inside. So will it have the same halacha? So the Gemara here brings a Mishnah in Menachis, Kahida Taninan, it says a Mishnah in Menachis, Taman, we learned over there, Hanisachim, Shekitshu Bekli, the Nisachim that were sanctified in a Keli, V'den V'nimtza Zevach Posel. That carbon was found to be Posel, Im Yesham Zevach Acher, if you have another carbon, Yikrivu Imai. So you can use these nisachim for another carbon. Ve'im lanu, if it remained overnight, yufsalu belina, it becomes puzzle. So in that Mishnah it tells us that the whole halacha that it can be used for another carbon is only been negated to the wine because it entered inside and it got that kedusha. But what heaps over, never entered inside, is not used in the same way. It's not used to buy kli sharis.